stereophonic sound for the home is recorded on 2 separate tracks, each one giving special emphasis to certain sections of the orchestra, as heard from those positions. Now, when played back simultaneously on 2 separate systems, the sounds are blended together to achieve a new dimension in sound, impossible to obtain in a monaural recording.
Welcome back to Z-Speed, and thanks for tuning back in. Today we're going to be replacing the camshaft position sensor on this 2003 to 2007 Honda Accord. Good news is, aftermarket sensors work great in this car, so we can save quite a bit of money doing so. So if you're interested in something like this, stay tuned, we'll get right on it. Now, the 2.4 liter engine has 2 camshaft position sensors, A and B, and I'll just be replacing the A sensor today. But once we get in to replace the sensor, you'll have access to both of these. So if you'd like to go ahead and swap them both out, go right ahead. So right now, without further ado, I'm going to show you kind of where we'll be working at in the engine bay. Good news is, it's not that far down into the engine bay at all. It's pretty easy access, actually, and it'll make our job pretty quick and simple today. So right now I'm actually staring right at it and I'm going to point it out for you, but the A sensor is located right here and you can almost get to it but not quite. We'll have to remove the ERG valve and I'll go over that in a minute. And then the B sensor is right back here on the opposite side, right there. Now these sensors are intake right here and exhaust on this side right here, if you were wondering. So let's get started. But before we get started, I'm going to show you how I even figured out that I had a problem with my camshaft position sensor. And really, the only thing you're going to get here is this little orange engine icon that Honda has on the dashboard. And that's about all you get, folks, because I had no idea that anything was wrong with it because it was idling great, didn't have any stall out problems when I was starting up. Everything seemed to be running well until this light popped up. So that's when I went ahead and got my engine code scanner out, and I have an Actron scanner, but don't worry, if you don't have one, you can go to O'Reilly's or Advanced Auto or AutoZone, and they will scan it for free and tell you what's going on. But yeah, I had no idea. Unlike Nissan, where your whole dashboard lights up and it was stalling out on startup, this thing was running great. So hats off to Honda on that one. It probably would have had a problem once it completely failed, but at this point it was still running really well. So you can see I'm scanning right now to see what I've got for codes, and boom, let's see what we got. Codes, just one here, camshaft position sensor A. So that is how I found out that I even had anything wrong with it. And then I scanned down a little bit further and I could see that it actually was confirmed that the sensor was going bad. So that's why we're going to go ahead and change out sensor A today. But while you're in there, if you want to change out sensor B, go right ahead. Now, before we can get access to the camshaft position sensors, we'll have to remove this ERG valve. There's just 3 12mm nuts holding this thing on, but you will need a swivel adapter to get access to a couple of these nuts. Now, the bottom right-hand nut doesn't need a swivel adapter to gain access to it, but it does have quite a bit of torque. This ERG valve gets extremely hot, and those nuts really get baked on there. So at this point, I go to hit the second one. That's when I realize that, hey, I'm going to need a swivel adapter because there's no way I can get access without it. So make sure that you have one before you start this job. You can see I just have a small one here, and that's about all you need, and then you can get pretty good access in there. Just remember though, there is quite a bit of torque, so you may have to, really apply a bit of force to get them to pop loose. Now once you get the nuts broken loose, you can use a magnet like I did here and fish those out. It'll be a little bit easier. Now once these nuts are all broken loose, you can go ahead and slide the ERG valve out. Just take your time, break it loose. It may be baked on there just a little bit. And once you get it kind of broken loose from the base, you can just slowly slide it out from around all these hoses here. Once you get it out of this area, then it'll be a little bit easier to disconnect the sensor. And I didn't mention earlier, but make sure your battery's already been disconnected, the negative battery cable. Now at this point, I want to make sure that you keep this area free of any debris. You can see this little plastic tab that actually broke off my camshaft position sensor A mount, a little plastic tab. You don't really have to have that. And it almost fell into the 2 ports where the ERG valve is located. That's the last thing you want, is any debris in these 2 ports. So be very careful not to let any debris fall into this area. Now that I've got my ERG valve disconnected, I'm going to inspect that, and I notice there's quite a bit of carbon buildup right in this area, so I'm going to hit it with a little bit of brake cleaner and see if I can get a little bit of this carbon to break free. And you can see there's a little bit built up over there as well. And while it's out, I'm also going to paint this little mount with some high temperature flat black paint just to keep it from rusting any further. Now that the ERG valve's out of the way, we have clear access to the camshaft position sensor A, and I'm having a little problem with my focus. Sorry about that, but it's right here with that little blue coloring on it. There it is right there. It's got one little 10mm bolt that's holding it in, so we'll break that loose and we'll be able to slide that sensor right out. One thing to note, you will need an extended 10mm socket to get in there. It'll make your life a lot easier if you have one of those. Now once you go to break it loose, there's not a lot of force holding this sensor in, so that came loose pretty easily. Now once I got my camshaft position sensor out, I noticed that it looked exactly like my aftermarket sensor, so I was really happy about that. I'm sorry it's a little blurry here, but this is my original one, and yes, it matched up perfectly with my cheap $35 aftermarket sensor. I'll try to put a link below if I can find one for it, but the fitment was great. Once I bolted it back in, no issues with that at all. Once I got that bolted back in, I went ahead and slipped my ERG valve back into position as well. And I'm going to go ahead and bolt that in. And once you get that all bolted in, you can go ahead and plug that sensor back in as well. And at that point, you are now ready for a startup. Okay, moment of truth. I'm in the car. Sorry it's dark. Let's see if I can get all these. There we go. Okay. You ready? Let's hope she starts. I don't know. So as you can see, the cold start idle was perfect and the engine icon reset itself. I did not use my scan tool to reset this prior to the engine start. Once I started it up, you can see it just disappeared on its own. So this Honda really does like this aftermarket sensor. It was a pretty cheap fix for 35 bucks. So we're real happy about that. I also wanted to recommend that you pick up one of these Haynes manuals. I looked at a few YouTube videos, but this manual really made it super easy to do this repair. And I have one of these manuals for each one of my cars. They really come in handy and they have a bunch of the torque specs that you'll need. So if you haven't picked one of these up, do so. I'm not sponsored by these people, but yes, these are great manuals. So I hope this video helped you out. If it did, please consider subscribing. I also want to give a shout out to all my current subscribers. Thank you all for subscribing and thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate each and every one of you. Until next video, just keep on repairing.